Between school, your friends, and social media, answers are everywhere. But where can you find the truth? Welcome to the Well StudentCast. We're asking for a friend so that you don't have to.
Hey guys, welcome to the Well StudentCast. My name is Ka'eo, and I'm here with my friend Brynn.
What's up, party people? We are back at the Well StudentCast asking questions for a friend so you don't have to.
And the question we got today, well, hold on, we got to preface because it's the summer. And lately on Netflix, all I'm getting is like these like summer romantic vibes right now, where it's like almost where it's like about the guy, he's in town for the summer, and the girl comes in. It's almost like Hallmark for Summer currently on Netflix.
Hallmark for Summer.
Currently happening on Netflix right now. But the question that we're asking, so you don't have to, because this is up here, is how far is too far? What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Like, how far is eating too much ice cream? How far is it to like before you should probably throw away your milk? Like, yeah, I don't know.
We do know. We'll stop playing dumb and we're just going to address it here. Typically, this question is people asking like, how close to the line can I get before I'm like technically sinning in my relationship, and saying like, I know that the Lord says and the Bible says that sex is bad, but how close can we get to that without actually doing something wrong?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And some person out there is like, finally, they're gonna hit this question. So that's why we're asking. That's why we're gonna talk about it. We're starting this conversation recognizing that, hey, boundaries are important. Having healthy boundaries is important. And oftentimes when we're trying to find the boundaries is what we ask, how far is too far? And because honestly, we're going to believe the best. And it's more not necessarily seeking permission to see how far you can get to the line, but rather where is the line so I can say far from it, or to respect the line. Yeah. And so that's kind of what we'll be talking about today.
That's good.
And that can be, sometimes people think it's just physical, but it can also be emotional and spiritual as well.
Yeah,
so we'll cover those.
Totally. The people are going to roll their eyes at my first perspective, but I just like, anytime this question comes up, my immediate like response, even in my own life, I'm like, okay, wait, we have to rephrase this question to what is most glorifying to the Lord. Because that's going to be a total shift in like how we honor the Lord first, and then out of that each other, then being like, how close to the line can we get? And so I know that's not as fun of a question to ask, but how glorifying to the Lord can we be in our relationships is how I would like to phrase this question.
Yeah, and that's actually a better perspective, because then immediately it's actually less focused on you, because let's be really honest, we really suck at holding ourselves accountable. And it's more, okay, it's me and the Lord. Yeah. And okay, that's my perspective then. And so it's less about like how I'm going to do it on my own strength, and more about what God says and how I can best honor him. And that helps us almost have like a humility when we approach our relationships, or I guess in all things in general. But,
yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to relationships, what are some ways that we can honor the Lord, or actually like even have a healthy conversation about boundaries, what it seems like?
Yeah. I think almost even starting through that, like, we're looking at how we honor the Lord, and out of that honor the person we're with, like recognizing the weight of being in a relationship with someone. You're being allowed into a space with someone and like a part of their story in such a special way, like an honor to have the opportunity. Like, you have a soul in front of you that you're getting, the Lord's allowing you to steward that gift. And so as you're processing, like, how do I honor the Lord and in turn honor this person that I'm dating? I don't know, like, what a gift to get the opportunity to walk out of, whether you're walking out of this relationship, dating relationship in marriage or in a breakup, you have the opportunity to show that person what it looks like to be, you're not going to love them perfectly, but like, you have the opportunity to point them to the love of Christ. And ideally, whether they're walking out of this in marriage or a breakup, they like believe 2% more about who the Lord's created them to be because of how you honored them, because of how you honor the Lord.
Yeah, exactly. And so what it sounds like is like, it just really can't just be like a one-sided like decision. It has to be probably both parties, and obviously in reflection what God's word says, or what God says in that. Yeah. And so it sounds like for a lot of us, what we need to make sure first and foremost is when we talk about any of these boundaries, you have to actually be very gut level honest. Like, okay, yeah, so as far as like treating them really well and recognizing their soul, it's also recognizing that if we are in a relationship with them, they will be someone's wife or husband. And a lot of times it's like, when we have conversations with students, they're like, well, yeah, like I'm probably going to marry them. And we're like, yeah, we love that. Maybe. But at the same time, like also maybe not, you know?
Yeah.
And I think Jordan has said this before, which is, I quoted him, and he says, he goes, look, I'm not telling you no, or like maybe because you're a high schooler, like I don't believe in that, the fact that you're actually experiencing genuine love for the person. It's not that at all. What I'm being like more like about is actually because you're not God.
So you just don't know.
You just don't know. And so with the fact of being in the unknown is, and that means we should therefore care even more about how we lead and care for and and how we treat this other person. Yeah.
I've heard it phrased in the sense of like date in a way that honors both of your future spouses, because if that is one another, you're dating and honoring them. Like if they end up being your spouse, great. Like you get to walk into marriage being like, we honored each other well in how we dated, and we don't have to carry like shame or guilt into our marriage based off how we dated. But then if you guys don't end up getting married, you're dating in a way where like you could look at their future spouse one day and be like, I know that I honored your wife well. And like, I'm not looking at you with like, man, I'm sorry. Like I added like shame to like how she's walking in your marriage or things like that. Prefacing like if there are things that you've already done or like you feel like you have missed the mark in like how you've dated before, the Lord can redeem and restore anything. So you're not too far gone, and like he can bring healing to any situation. But I think for us to walk into those situations and be like, how can I do this in a way that respects both of our future spouses is a high bar. But I think like tangibly, as you guys are like having conversations around boundaries, one marker of like, if you're ready to be in a relationship, everyone's rolling their eyes like, I'm ready for a relationship. I've been ready, whatever. But as you're going into that, are you ready to even have a specific conversation about boundaries? Like, are you aware of what your boundaries are? And do you feel like you can enter into that conversation with another person and be specific about those? And if you're like, heck no, I won't have that conversation. That feels awkward. That feels weird. It is awkward and weird. But like, if you aren't willing to enter into that, press pause on like dating, because you have to be willing to have that conversation to start. But as far as physical boundaries, I think a lot of times we're pretty clear on like, I know that I'm like can't have sex with this person. I know that I like can't do X, Y, Z. But I think sometimes we don't look at the spaces to prevent that from being like a potential stumbling block. And so one thing that I would say is to kind of be honest with yourself of like, hey, like, again, what is most glorifying to the Lord in how we have this dating relationship? Is it that we're like dating in public? Is it that we're like around friends, or that we like text friends before we hang out or things like that? Those might not feel like this black and white, like clear physical boundary, but it is something that helps to ensure that you guys can uphold the physical boundary.
Yeah, you just have to be really honest with yourself. We are great liars to ourselves and be like, yeah, I can honor them still in this, or yeah, I can still do that, or you have to be really honest with yourself. So I love that you're like, hey, we just need to just be gut level honest with ourselves first. So I love that you said that, Brynn. And then even those are with some physical boundaries. There's also emotional boundaries too, where it's like, hey, like if you feel like in your day to day, if you feel like if that person is essentially what allows you to live your day to day, or that person like gets you through like all the hard things, then maybe you've actually gone too far at that point.
Yeah.
Where like they are now sustaining you and not the Lord.
Yeah.
Like I think that's when you've like, yeah, I've gone too far. Emotionally, I've attributed a lot of my like life and like emotional well-being is dependent on them. I think you've gone too far then. And so that's just a thing for you to ask yourselves. Like, am I like that? Like, I think we say codependency, but essentially it's like, am I like interdependent on them very much so? Because that even will play into the rest of your other aspects of relationships with spiritual and, physical as well. So,
yeah, I think that, I don't know, there's so many things that fall into emotional boundaries, but I think even like how you talk about the future, I think can be something that you guys can be clear about of like, hey, like, let's not make plans that are more than a month out. Like, that might sound so weird, but I think like, to allow your heart the space to be like, hey, we're not thinking like a year out. Like if I'm a junior in college, we're not talking about college in 2 years. And like if we're doing long distance yet, because we're not there yet. So let's like be present in this moment. But even like in the sense of, and this was something that like I set, like, I feel like 3 or 4 years ago, where I was like, I don't want someone to like say they love me until we're like ready to talk about engagement. And that might sound so intense to some people, where they're what the heck?
Yeah, but that's in your way of being like, yeah, this is a
big deal. Yeah. And like, once you hear that, like there's no going back. And so I think for you and yourself, like some people just fall differently with emotional boundaries of like what those things would mean to hear. But I think, again, you have to be very honest with yourself of like, what would that mean to hear? And then if they aren't my spouse, like what would that cause? And so, to hear like, I love you or whatever would probably mean so much to anyone. But I think to know like if that didn't end up being the person, how would that feel afterwards? And I'm not saying to date with this, like always being like, if we broke up, like what would that feel like? But to just be realistic of like what that would cause.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get this a lot especially in the church world, especially because where we're at, being at the Well Community Church, and all of our students go to church and they ask us questions like this. They'll be like, okay, yeah, so we and my,
me and my about dating for marriage.
Yeah, me and then they'll be like, well, me and my girlfriend, we're doing Bible studies together now. Like we're praying together and all stuff. And then I would if that's where you're at, okay, I'm not gonna say no to that. Those are really healthy things, but they can get very unhealthy really quickly. And here's how you know. If now your relationship with the Lord is dependent on them, like if you can be like, yeah, I definitely have a Bible time. I definitely have a community. Like I have my own relationship with Christ outside of my like dating relationship. And I think, okay, we're good. We're in a healthy spot. But it gets unhealthy, and it's how far is too far. This is too far is when you're like, the only time I read my Bible is when I read it with her. Yeah. Only time I pray is when I pray with him. Or the only time I'm like talking about scriptures with God is with her. At that point you have gone too far, and you've put her or him in a place that really God should be. Yeah. And so that's how you would know. So ideally it's like, okay, we're probably not going to do that. I'm going to have my own relationship with Christ that's not dependent on someone else here. So
yeah, for sure. And I think like, to your point, that can get like messy or tricky when it's like, it doesn't mean that you don't talk about what the Lord's doing in your life, because that can get confusing where you're like, I'm supposed to know if this person's walking with the Lord and that he's like a mature believer and pursues the Lord on his own, but then we're not supposed to talk about that because that's kind of like crossing this weird, like this unclear spiritual boundary or things like that. It's okay to talk about what the Lord's doing in your guys' lives. You just shouldn't be the only people you're doing that with. And so like, that's great. Like ask your boyfriend, ask your girlfriend, like, how can I be praying for you this week? Like, I want to be praying for you. Or like, what's the Lord teaching you? Great. Like, but if they're walking out an independent relationship with the Lord, they're gonna be able to answer those questions honestly, because you're not the first time that that's being asked of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Where I was going with what I thought that we were gonna, when I was like dating for marriage, because I thought we were going the same way.
I just had to say that.
No, yours was right. I was just like, I think we're having one of those. We're both thinking the same thing. But I was gonna say, in Christian culture, we talk a lot about dating for marriage. Yes. And we did a relationships conference like 2 years ago. And I thought it was phrased so well of like, dating for marriage doesn't mean marriage is in sight. I can't remember it was like dating in marriage, or dating for marriage is marriage in view versus marriage in sight. Yes. Is that the two different ones?
Yes.
Where it's like, yes, like anytime we're dating for that idea of like honoring each other's future spouses, honoring the person you're dating, because the way that we date and the experiences that we have will impact the way we view relationships, and that will impact your future marriage. It doesn't mean that right now that you have to be dating someone and saying like, I see myself marrying you in the near future. Yes. That is a lot to be carrying.
Yes.
And like that, even that is really hard to guard your heart in that, to be like, okay, if you break up in Christian culture, it's really hard because you're like, I was dating you because I thought that I could marry you, and now we're breaking up and like, I don't know what to do with this. But I think that flip side of just saying like, you're dating, you're not repulsed by the idea of marrying someone with those characteristics. You're dating someone who like has the characteristics of what you would want to see in a future spouse. But you're waiting to talk about that, like marriage is in sight until you're older, not because you're like just a high schooler, but because like you still live with your parents, and because like you aren't old enough to get married yet, because you're under the age of 18. Yes. Like that's not,
what is the age? Yeah,
that's not legal. I think unless like parents sign off on it. But so like marriage isn't in sight yet. And so that idea of dating for marriage just looks differently in your season of life than it will 4 years from now.
Yeah. And so, so that's like, that is like the heavy piece of it too. And so we would just recommend and encourage you, instead of having the question of how far is too far, better have the question of just like, I have a soul in front of me.
Yeah.
And how much can I honor the Lord in what we do? And have an honest like thing there, because your answer will honestly define for you how you view the other person. Because if you view the other person like a soul in front of you, if you view the other person like, God's like creation, view the other person as someone's future spouse, then you're going to uphold these lines or boundaries with high honor, because you're like, I want to respect this person. If you don't see them as that, then it's whatever. And so we would just encourage you, just like for us, just have a really honest conversation with you guys as you're listening, of being like, hey, check your motivations.
Yeah.
And because a red flag for me is how far is too far.
Yeah.
A green flag is I want to honor this person.
Totally.
So
that's so good. Yeah. Viewing them as a gift to be steward and not like for your gain is huge. And I think my last encouragement would be, taking a genuine look at who you view God to be as you're pursuing this relationship. If you view the Lord as a God of restriction versus a God of provision, like those are going to totally reframe how you enter into a relationship. Where like if you're viewing him as a God of restriction, you're viewing him as like you're withholding these like things from me that I should get to experience. Whereas if you're viewing him as like, you're a Lord who provides and who like loves me, protects me, and wants what's best for me. In those moments where it's like you have a choice to make, you're going to choose the Lord's way because you know that his way is best, not like just this game of withholding from you. Yeah,
it's this idea of like, okay, when we pray or what we're seeking for the Lord to provide, it's like a difference between want and need. And sometimes what we want isn't what we need. And when you ask for your want, God's like, that's not what you need. And he gives you what you need, not what you want. Yeah. And if you see it that way, you're like, okay, wow, Lord, thank you for protecting me from that. Because in Luke 11, that's where Jesus saying like, if you like, what loving father, if their kid asks for a fish, gives them a scorpion, Yeah. And that's just the whole point of like, we might be asking for something and not recognizing that like, actually that's going to be more harmful for us. Yeah. And so the Lord's like, I'm going to give you this instead. Yeah. And that's not restriction. That is kindness, like loving kindness to provide what we need, not what we want. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if I was, I don't know, like if I just wanted Cane's chicken, I really love Cane's, especially in this season. It's my summer food. It's my summer food. Someone get him a gift card. But it's like if I just eat Cane's like every single day for every single meal, it would not be very loving if like someone was like, yeah, I'll just keep giving it to you, versus being like, you know what, please eat a broccoli, right? Like
I've heard it illustrated as like we would see like, say you were watching a parent with their toddler and the toddler's like throwing a fit, being like, I want chocolate for dinner. Like I want my candy that I just got from a birthday party for my dinner tonight. And they're like, hey, I hear you, but I made you chicken, broccoli, and some fruit. I don't know. We would see that as care. Yes. The toddler is sitting there like, my mom is restricting from me. You're not giving me what I want. I'm going to scream and cry until I get this, whatever. And that parent's not budging because they're like, no, you need fuel and you need what's going to like make you grow. And that candy wouldn't be healthy for you, all those things. And so we, from an outsider perspective, can see that situation and say that parent loves their child and that child doesn't understand what the parent is doing. And I think that's us with the Lord. We are the toddler all day long.
Yes.
We are not the parent in that illustration.
We are not.
We're the toddler and we're like, the candy's good.
It's good.
And the Lord's like,
made the candy
you need
too,
some
Lord.
chicken and broccoli, okay? But
you need some health.
That's good.
That's good. All right. Well, with that being said, this is obviously a longer conversation. And so we just encourage you to go and invite people in your circles, people who you trust, and just be like, hey, I think I've been asking the wrong question. And maybe this is for the first time. You're like, yeah, actually, I've been the toddler. I've been focusing on my needs and not what other people need and not what the Lord is asking me to do. And so our encouragement is to be gut level honest about your motivations for asking the question of how far is too far. And recognizing that the people in front of you, our job is, and our just honestly responsibility is to steward the people in front of us well. And so with that being said, we will see you guys next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Well StudentCast. As always, don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about us. For more information about the Well Student Ministries, visit thewellcommunity.org/students.